Welcome back to Mr. Midnight. I'm your host, and tonight I need to warn you about Oregon. Something is hunting in those ancient forests. People are going to work normal jobs and coming back changed, if they come back at all. What happens when you blow into an old bone whistle found in a school? What's really living at the bottom of Oregon's deepest lake? And why are bridges in Portland demanding a price that no one should ever have to pay? Tonight, we have 8 true stories that will make you never want to set foot in the Pacific Northwest again. These come from real people, ordinary workers who discovered that some places in Oregon belong to things far older and more dangerous than humans. The native tribes tried to warn us. They left stories, legends, teachings about what lives in those dark woods, but we didn't listen. And now, people are paying the price. If you're new here, subscribe right now because you won't want to miss what Mr. Midnight brings you next. I'm going to tell you something that will chill you to the bone. In Oregon, the old spirits never died. They're still there, still watching, still waiting for someone to cross the wrong line. Are you ready to hear what happens when modern people meet ancient nightmares? Let's find out. But don't say I didn't warn you. My name is Sarah Martinez, and I've been teaching elementary school for 6 years now. I manage a 3rd grade classroom at Riverside Elementary, and let me tell you, dealing with 28 8-year-olds every day is no joke. I've handled everything from playground fights to parent conferences where moms yell at me because their kid got a B instead of an A. I've seen kids throw up on their desks, watched them cry over broken crayons, and somehow managed to teach them how to read and write through it all. But what happened last October in my classroom changed everything I thought I knew about my job. Some sounds should never be heard by the living. The whole thing started after our field trip to the Siletz Cultural Center. It was a Tuesday, and we'd spent the morning learning about Native American history. The kids loved seeing all the old tools and hearing the stories. When we got back to school that afternoon, I was cleaning up the usual mess: crumpled worksheets, forgotten lunchboxes, and Tommy's lost jacket that somehow ended up in the art supply closet. That's when I found it on my desk. A small bone whistle, about 4 inches long, carved with intricate patterns I didn't recognize. It was yellowed with age and had strange symbols etched along its surface. One of the kids must have picked it up at the cultural center and forgotten it. I made a mental note to call the museum tomorrow and return it. Whistle felt cold in my hands, heavier than it should have been. The bone was smooth, but had tiny holes drilled through it in a pattern that looked almost like musical notes. I held it up to the light coming through our classroom windows. The autumn sun made the bone look almost transparent, and I could see dark shadows inside, like there was something trapped in there. I should have just put it in my desk drawer and forgotten about it. But I was curious. I teach music appreciation twice a week, and I'd never seen an instrument quite like this. I wondered what kind of sound it would make. So I put it to my lips and blew. The sound that came out wasn't loud, but it cut through the air like a knife. It was high and thin, almost like a scream, but musical too. The note hung in the classroom for way longer than it should have, echoing off the walls and the whiteboard, and the little desks arranged in neat rows. Then everything went quiet. Not normal quiet, the kind of quiet that makes your ears ring and your skin crawl. Even the air conditioning stopped humming. I set the whistle down on my desk and packed up my things. The late afternoon sun was already getting low, and I had papers to grade at home. But as I walked to my car in the parking lot, I could swear I heard the whistle's sound still echoing somewhere behind me. The next morning started normal enough. I got to school early, like always, and set up for the day. I had the kids doing reading groups before lunch, and everything was going fine until about 10:30. Realizing, I heard the first whisper. I was helping Katie sound out a difficult word when I heard someone say, very quietly, "Tell Mama I'm cold." The voice was soft and sad, like a little kid who'd been crying. I looked around the classroom. All my students were focused on their books or talking quietly in their groups. None of them had said anything. "Did someone say something?" I asked. 2 little faces looked up at me with confusion. "No, Miss Martinez," Emma said. "We're being good." I shook my back to helping Katie, but 10 minutes later, I heard it again. A different voice this time, older, saying, "I can't find my way home." By lunchtime, I was hearing whispers every few minutes, always different voices, always saying sad, scared things. It hurts so much. "Don't leave me here. I want to see the sky one more time." I thought maybe I was getting sick. Stress can make you hear things, right? I've been working a lot of overtime lately, staying after school for parent conferences and grading papers until midnight. Maybe I just needed more sleep. Afternoon art time, something happened that made me realize this wasn't just in my head. The kids were drawing pictures of their families, using crayons and markers. I was walking around the room, helping them and praising their work, when I stopped at Billy's desk. Billy was 8 years old, with freckles and a gap-toothed smile. He was usually one of my happiest students, but today he was drawing something that made my stomach drop. Instead of his family, Billy had drawn a picture of a woman in an old-fashioned dress, lying in a bed. Her face was grey, and her eyes were closed. Above her head, he'd written in his messy handwriting, "The fever took me fast." "Billy," I said, kneeling down next to his desk. "What's this picture about?" Billy looked up at me with his big brown eyes. "I don't know, Miss Martinez. The lady told me to draw it. She's been talking to me all day." My hands started shaking. "What lady, honey?" "The one standing by the window. She says her name is Margaret, and she died here a long time ago when this was a different building." I looked at the window. There was nothing there but afternoon sunlight and the playground outside. "Billy, there's no one by the window." He looked confused. "But she's right there. She's wearing a white dress, and she keeps saying, 'The fever took me fast,' over and over." That's when I realized other kids were drawing strange pictures too. Emma had drawn a man in overalls holding his chest. Jessica was coloring a picture of children lying on the floor. Marcus had drawn what looked like people coughing up blood. And they were all writing words above their pictures. Words like, "Can't breathe anymore," and "Tell my pa I was brave," and "The sickness spread so quick." I gathered up all their drawings with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Okay, everyone. Art's time is over. Let's do some quiet reading instead." As the kids got out their books, I heard more whispers. Dozens of them now, layering over each other like a horrible choir. Old voices and young voices, men and women and children, all saying their last words. All talking about dying. "The influenza got me. Couldn't fight it anymore. Safeguard up with fever. Tell them I tried to hold on. Quickest." The voices were getting louder. And worse, I was starting to realize that my students were hearing them too. They kept looking around the classroom with scared expressions. Some of them were starting to repeat the words they heard. "Miss Martinez," Katie said in a small voice, "why is that man saying his lungs feel like they're on fire?" That's when I remembered something I'd heard on our field trip. The museum guide had mentioned that our school was built on land that used to be a quarantine hospital during the 1918 flu pandemic. Hundreds of people had died here over the course of 2 winters. The building had been torn down in 1952, and the elementary school built in its place. I looked down at the bone whistle, still sitting on my desk where I'd left it yesterday. The museum guide had also mentioned something else. Something about Silet's death whistles. How they were used to call the spirits of people who had died recently. How they could open doorways between the world of the living and the world of the dead. Barracks. My throat felt tight. When I tried to swallow, it felt like something was stuck in there. Something hard and cold. The whispers were getting louder. My students were getting more agitated. Some of them were starting to rock back and forth in their chairs. Others were drawing pictures without even realizing it, their hands moving by themselves as dead voices guided their crayons. "Please, to speak. to tell them everything was going to be okay. But when I opened my mouth, the only sound that came out was a thin, high whistle. The same sound I'd made yesterday when I blew into that cursed bone. The sound filled the classroom, and suddenly every one of my students stopped what they were doing and looked at me. But their eyes weren't their own anymore. They were older, sadder, filled with the knowledge of people who had died long before these children were born. And then they started to speak, not in their own voices, but in the voices of the dead. "The fever took me on a Tuesday," said Emma in the old years old, whispered Billy in a man's deep voice. "We ran out of medicine," Katie said, sounding like a nurse from 1918. I tried to scream, but only that terrible whistle sound came out, and I felt something moving in my throat, something hard and sharp, like bone, growing inside my neck. The PA system crackled to life, even though no one was in the main office. Instead of announcements, it began broadcasting sounds from 90 years ago. Coughing, fits, last gasps. The voices of doctors saying, "There's nothing more we can do." Children calling for their mothers. The sound of bodies being dragged across wooden floors. Stood up from their desks in perfect unison and began walking toward me. As they moved, their mouths stretched wider than human mouths should go, and the voices of the dead poured out of them like water from a broken dam. Hundreds of voices, thousands, everyone who had ever died in this place, all speaking their final words at the same time. I relaxed what I had done. The whistle hadn't just opened a door to the dead, it had infected me with their voices. And when I made that whistling sound in class, I had passed the infection to my students. They were carriers now. They would go home tonight, and the voices would follow them. Their families would hear the whispers of the dead. Their parents and siblings and grandparents would become infected too. The plague would spread through the whole town, carried by sound waves, passed from person to person every time someone spoke. Soon, everyone in our community would be hearing the final words of everyone who had ever died here. And the living would forget how to use their own voices. They would only be able to speak the words of the dead. I could feel the bone whistle growing inside my throat now. It was becoming part of me, reshaping my vocal cords and windpipe. When I tried to breathe, air whistled through the holes in my throat like wind through a graveyard. My students surrounded my desk, their faces blank, their mouths moving as hundreds of dead voices spoke through them. The PA system kept broadcasting the sounds of the 1918 plague, and somewhere in the distance, I could hear other teachers in other classrooms starting to make that same thin, whistling sound. The infection was spreading through the school. I knew there was only one way to stop it. The whistle inside me was growing stronger, but I still had some control. I could feel it wanting to make one final, perfect note. A sound so pure and powerful, it would shatter everything. I stood up on my desk, took the deepest breath I could manage, and let the whistle take over completely. The sound that came out of me broke every window in the classroom, then every window in the school. The glass exploded outward in a shower of sharp fragments, and suddenly there was blessed, perfect silence. Confiscated, the dead voices stopped. My students blinked and looked around in confusion themselves again. The PA system went quiet, but the cost my vocal cords along with the windows. I would never speak again. And my students, they could talk, but only in whispers now. Quiet, sad whispers that sounded exactly like the final words of people who died in 1918. Prohibited from teaching that day. The school said it was for medical reasons, which was true enough. They replaced all the windows and hired a new teacher for my classroom. But sometimes I drive by the school and watch the playground through the chain-link fence. I can see my former students playing at recess, and if I concentrate, I can hear what they're saying to each other. They speak in whispers of people who died a century ago. Quiet words about fever and medicine and wanting to go home. They don't seem to mind it anymore. They've learned to live with the voices of the dead. And sometimes, late at night, when the wind blows just right, I can still hear that bone whistle calling from somewhere deep inside the school. waiting for someone else to find it and blow into it, just once, to see what sound it makes. Some sounds should never be heard by the living. But once you've made them, you can never take them back. My name is Diana Chen, and I've been working security for the past 2 years. I know that doesn't sound like much experience, but in this business, you learn fast or you don't last. I've worked overnight shifts at warehouses, office buildings, and construction sites. I've dealt with break-ins, drunk trespassers, and equipment thieves. I thought I'd seen everything that could go wrong on a night shift. But what happened last October at the old Pacific Northwest Cannery changed everything I thought I knew about this job. Some places, I learned, don't want to be disturbed. The Pacific Northwest Cannery sits right on the Columbia River, about 30 miles east of Portland. It's been abandoned for 15 years, ever since the salmon runs got so bad they couldn't keep the business going. The building is massive, 4 stories of concrete and steel, with huge processing floors and dozens of smaller rooms that used to house office space and worker facilities. Riverton Development bought the property 6 months ago and planned to turn it into luxury condos with river views. They hired Cascade Security to watch the place during construction, and that's where I came in. The job was simple enough. Drive to the site at 10 p.m., check all the entrances, walk through each floor to make sure everything was secure, then spend the rest of the night monitoring the security cameras from the guard station they'd set up in the old supervisor's office on the 2nd floor. I had to do hourly walkthroughs and file reports every 4 hours. The pay was good, $35 an hour for basically sitting alone and watching TV screens. The first thing I noticed was how the local Native American protesters felt about the project. There were usually 10 or 15 people from the Yakama Nation holding signs outside the main gate during the day. They'd pack up by evening, but they left their messages clear. Sacred ground, do not disturb. And the salmon spirits will remember. I asked my supervisor Mike about it during my first week. Don't worry about them, he said. They're peaceful. Just some old legends about salmon spirits and burial grounds. The lawyers cleared everything with the state. We're good to go. The building itself felt normal at first. Big, empty and cold, but normal. The construction crew was gutting the interior, so most of the rooms were bare concrete with exposed pipes and electrical work. My radio worked fine, the cameras showed clear pictures, and the building was solid. The only weird thing was how quiet it got at night. Most buildings have sounds, wind through gaps, pipes settling, electrical humming. This place went completely silent after midnight, like it was holding its breath. I'd been working there for 3 weeks when things started getting strange. It was a Tuesday night in early October, around 2 a.m. I was doing my hourly walkthrough on the 3rd floor when I heard something that made me stop. It sounded like water running, like a faucet left on somewhere. But the water had been shut off to the building months ago. I followed the sound down the hallway, checking each room. The noise got louder as I moved toward the back of the building, but when I reached the last room, it stopped. Complete silence again. I checked the room twice with my flashlight. Nothing but bare walls and construction dust. When I got back to the guard station, I made a note in my log. Possible plumbing leak, 3rd floor back section. Recommend daytime check. Misunderstanding. The next night, it happened again. Same time, same sound, same result. Nothing there when I investigated. But this time, something else was off. When I watched the security camera footage the next morning, I saw something that made my skin crawl. On the camera covering that 3rd floor hallway, there were shapes moving through the empty rooms. Silver, fish-shaped shadows swimming through the air like the rooms were full of water. Behind the footage to Mike, when he came by Thursday morning, he watched it twice, frowning. Camera malfunction, he said finally. These old buildings mess with the electronics sometimes. I'll have the tech guys check the system." Those weren't technical glitches. They moved like living things. Friday night, things escalated. I was in the guard station around 1 a.m. when my radio started picking up strange signals. Instead of the usual static between channels, I was hearing sounds of rushing water and what I swear were fish gasping for air. The sounds lasted about 30 seconds, then cut to normal static. I tried different channels, but it happened on all of them. Then the building's floors started feeling wrong under my feet. During my 2 a.m. walkthrough, the concrete felt soft and spongy, like I was walking on wet ground instead of solid flooring. I got down on my hands and knees with my flashlight and pressed against the floor. It gave slightly under pressure, and when I put my ear to it, I could hear running water somewhere far below. That's when I first noticed the gills. I felt a weird tickling sensation on my neck while I was kneeling there. When I touched the spot, I felt 3 small openings along the side of my throat, opening and closing like they were trying to breathe. I ran to the bathroom and looked in the mirror. 3 gill slits, each about an inch long, were moving rhythmically on the left side of my neck. When I covered them with my hand, I felt short of breath. I called Mike immediately. "Well, I need to go home," I told him. "Something's wrong with me. I think I'm having an allergic reaction or something. Can you finish the shift? I don't have anyone to cover until morning." I looked at myself in the mirror again. The gills were definitely there, definitely moving. But I needed this job, and Mike was right. There was nobody else. "I'll finish," I said. Hours were a nightmare. The gill slits kept opening and closing, and I kept feeling like I wasn't getting enough air unless I breathed through them. The security cameras showed more and more silver shapes swimming through the empty rooms. My radio was constantly picking up sounds of rushing water, mixed with what sounded like voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Around 5 a.m., during my final walkthrough, I made it to the main processing floor on the first level. This was where they used to clean and package the salmon back when the cannery was running. The room was huge, probably 50 feet by 100 feet, with a high ceiling and concrete floors that sloped toward drains. As I walked across the floor, my footsteps started making wet splashing sounds instead of the usual echo on concrete. I looked down and saw my boots were leaving damp prints, even though the floor looked dry. The air started to feel thick and humid, like I was walking through fog. Then I saw the first body. It was floating face down in the corner of the room, even though there was no visible water. Tom Martinez, one of the construction foremen. I recognized his work clothes and the tattoo on his arm. He was just floating there in mid-air, about 3 feet off the ground, like he was underwater. I ran to him and tried to pull him down, but he was surprisingly heavy, and my hands passed right through him like he wasn't really there. When I managed to touch his face, his eyes opened and water poured out of his mouth. His lungs were full of river water, and he was trying to speak, but only bubbles came out. I grabbed my radio. "Mike! Mike! We have an emergency! Tom Martinez is in the building and something's wrong with him." Then the sound of rushing water. Then Mike's voice, but distorted like he was underwater. "Diana! The salmon! They came home!" That's when I realized the radio wasn't connecting to Mike. It was connecting to the Yakima protesters' warnings. The salmon spirits were real, and they were reclaiming their spawning ground. I started running for the exit, but the building was changing around me. Water was seeping through the walls, even though we were nowhere near the river. The concrete floors were becoming soft and muddy like a riverbed. The air was so thick with moisture, I could barely breathe except through the gills on my neck. As I ran up the stairs, I started feeling sick, really sick. I made it to the second floor bathroom just as I began throwing up, but what came out wasn't normal. I was vomiting live salmon, small ones at first, then bigger ones. They flopped desperately on the bathroom floor, gasping and dying while I watched in horror. I looked at my hands. My fingernails were falling off, one by one, replaced by small silver scales that caught the light like metal. The gills on my neck were opening wider, and I realized I could breathe water vapor directly through them. The building was transforming around me. The salmon spirits weren't just haunting the place. They were turning it back into what it used to be. A spawning ground, a place where salmon came to die and be reborn. Could hear them now, thousands of them, swimming through the air in every room. The cameras showed the entire building filled with ghostly silver fish, all moving in the same direction, toward the main processing floor where Tom's body was floating. The water pressure inside the building was increasing. I could feel it in my ears, like diving deep underwater. Windows on the first floor started exploding outward, spraying glass and river water onto the parking lot. I ran for the stairs to the roof. It was the only way up, the only way out. But with each step, the water got deeper and thicker. By the time I reached the third floor, I was essentially swimming through supernatural river water that hung in the air like fog. More bodies were floating in the hallways now. Other construction workers, all with their lungs full of water, all trying to speak, but only producing bubbles. They weren't dead. They were transforming, becoming part of the salmon spirit's eternal migration. Billions, the building was groaning and shifting like it was underwater. The concrete walls were becoming soft and organic, like the inside of a fish. The salmon were everywhere now, swimming past me, through me, around me. They weren't threatening, they were just going home. I finally reached the roof access. The door was locked, but the metal was so corroded by supernatural water that I could kick it open. I burst through just as the entire building started collapsing inward on itself. From the roof, I could see what was really happening. The building wasn't just flooding, it was transforming into a massive whirlpool. The concrete was dissolving, the steel was bending, and everything was spiraling down toward the river. The salmon spirits were taking their spawning ground back, returning it to the water where it belonged. I jumped from the roof to the parking lot just as the building completed its collapse. Where the Pacific Northwest Cannery had stood for 60 years, there was now a perfect circular pool of Columbia River water, teeming with silver salmon swimming in an endless spiral. I survived, obviously, since I'm telling you this story. But I'll never be the same. The luxury condo project was permanently cancelled. The developers couldn't explain what happened to their building, and the insurance company refused to pay out for impossible structural failure. I moved inland after that. I live in Idaho now, as far from any river or lake as I can get. I changed careers too. I work at a library in Boise, surrounded by books and dry air, and nothing that reminds me of water. But I still have the gills. They never went away. They open and close when I'm stressed, and sometimes, late at night, I can still hear the Columbia River calling to me through them. I cough up scales at least once a week, small silver ones that I flush down the toilet immediately. The Yakima protesters were right. The salmon spirits did remember. And some places, once they decide to reclaim what was theirs, won't be stopped by anything humans can build. If you're ever offered a security job at an old fish processing plant or cannery, especially near a river, do yourself a favor. Find a different job. The salmon always come home to spawn, and they don't care what's been built where they used to die. My name is Robert Kim, and I've been managing Riverside Thrift for 5 years now. It's not glamorous work, sorting through donated clothes, pricing old furniture, and dealing with estate sales from people who've passed on. But I'm good at it. I can spot valuable antiques mixed in with junk, and I know how to price things so they sell but still make us money. I've built up a steady customer base, and my boss trusts me to run the place on my own most days. But what happened 3 months ago changed everything I thought I knew about the things people leave behind. Some objects hold more than just memories. They steal them. It started on a rainy Tuesday morning in October. Mrs. Henderson from the funeral home called about an estate sale pickup. The deceased was an elderly woman named Margaret Crowfeather, who'd lived alone in a small house on the reservation outside town. No family came forward to claim her belongings, so everything was being donated to us. I loaded up our van and drove out to the address. The house was tiny but clean, with that musty smell old places get when windows stay closed too long. Most of the furniture was standard stuff: worn couch, outdated TV, kitchen table with mismatched chairs. But in the back bedroom I found something special. Lined up along one wall were 12 Native American baskets. They were beautiful, intricate geometric patterns woven in natural browns and blacks, some with red accents. I could tell they were handmade, not tourist shop replicas. These were the real deal, probably worth good money to the right collector. I carefully loaded them into boxes, already thinking about how much I could price them for. As I was carrying the last box to the van, an elderly Klamath woman approached me. She must have been in her 70s, with long grey hair braided down her back and deep lines around her dark eyes. "You're taking Margaret's baskets," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, ma'am. I manage the thrift store in town. Her belongings are being donated." When the woman shook her head slowly, "Those baskets shouldn't be sold. They should be burned." I set the box down carefully. What was worth? I fortunately rooming for. The cause of box was floated, which was being so from the world. "Ma'am, these are beautiful pieces. Someone will appreciate them." "You don't understand," she said. "The cause of those man," she said. "It was made to save, the reason way, the people look to rates." "You don't understand," she said, stepping closer. "Margaret was descended from the memory thief. Those baskets, they hold more than just grass and roots. They hold pieces of people, memories, experiences. Anyone who touches them long enough," she paused, looking directly at me, "they lose themselves." I smiled politely. I found she just only good money. They will into the pieces of memories. They hold more than just grass. Anyone who touches them long enough, they lose themselves. I smiled politely. She spent of them women-like. She touched them. The long just working to share. They lose themselves. They plummet. They do them. They complex. They prove themselves. They other work. I found that, the lock of the dorm and Roman possible, they called me thinking about them. The long that mixed the chart, they called me self from them. They called me, they called it. They called them, they touched them, they been burned themselves. I smiled politely. She said, "There's natural than the memories between the memory them. They lose themselves. They hold more than just grass. They hold memories. They hold more than just grass. They hold memories. They hold memories. Anyone who touches them, they hold more than. They true themselves." I smiled politely. She said, "Margaret, they didn't provide the brother ground. It was been sure. They true them everything within a value. They called me imported. They took them both. They hold memories. They lose themselves." I smiled politely. She said, "They's were known that we sell them of grass. They lose themselves. They hold memories. Anyone who live them, they touch them. They hold memories. They hold memories. Anyone who read them. They hold more than just grass and roots." Smiled politely. "I appreciate your concern, but they're just baskets. Beautiful craftsmanship, but just baskets." The woman studied my face for a long moment. "You won't listen. They never do. But remember what I told you when it starts happening, when you can't tell which memories are yours anymore." She walked away without another word. I loaded the last box and drove back to the store, dismissing her warning as superstition. I had a business to run. Back at Riverside Thrift, I set up the baskets on a special display near the front register. I priced them between $40 and $80 each, depending on size and complexity. They looked impressive, the kind of authentic Native American art that our customers loved. The first basket sold within 2 hours to a middle-aged woman who collected indigenous crafts. She seemed thrilled with her purchase and paid in cash without haggling. I made a note to look for more Native American pieces at future estate sales. The next day, that same woman returned. She walked right up to my register, carrying the basket in a shopping bag. "Excuse me, I need to return this," she said. "Of course, was there a problem with it?" Chrome, she looked confused, almost lost. I don't remember buying it. I found it on my kitchen table this morning, but I have no memory of going to a thrift store yesterday. I don't even shop at thrift stores." Police. I pulled up her receipt on our old register. "You bought it yesterday around noon, paid cash." "That's impossible. I was at work yesterday. I'm a bank manager. I would never... I don't buy things like this." She stared at the basket like it was something alien. "I don't even like baskets." Her confusion seemed genuine, but people return things for all kinds of reasons. I processed the refund and put the basket back on display. Maybe she'd had a stressful day and forgotten. It happens. But then it happened again, and again. Over the next week, 3 more baskets were returned by customers who claimed they had no memory of buying them. Each person seemed genuinely bewildered, almost frightened by their lack of memory. That's when I started experiencing the dreams. At first, they seemed like normal dreams, just more vivid than usual. I'd dream about being a little girl playing with dolls in a room I'd never seen. The details were so clear: the pink wallpaper, the smell of my mother's perfume, the feeling of brushing the doll's hair. But I'm a 34-year-old man who grew up in a house with blue walls. Then I dreamed about being an old man fishing by a lake. I could feel the sun on my weathered hands, taste the coffee from my thermos, remember my late wife packing the sandwiches that morning. The grief felt so real it woke me up crying. But I'm not married. I've never been married. The dreams came every night, different lives, different memories. A teenage boy learning to drive, a woman giving birth, an elderly man dying in a hospital bed. Each dream felt completely real while I was having it, like I was actually living those moments. During the day, I started spacing out at work. I'd be pricing a donated lamp and suddenly remember, with perfect clarity, buying that same lamp new in 1987 for my first apartment. Except I was 12 years old in 1987, and I'd never seen the lamp before in my life. The memories became more frequent. I'd remember graduations I never attended, jobs I never worked, children I never had. I started keeping a notebook, trying to separate my real memories from the false ones, but the line was getting blurry. One morning, I couldn't remember my wife's name. I wasn't married, I knew that, but there was this persistent memory of a woman with brown hair who made amazing pancakes on Sunday mornings. I could see her face clearly, remember the sound of her laugh, but I couldn't recall her name or how we'd met. The memory felt as real as any other, but it couldn't be mine. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror and saw a face that seemed wrong somehow. My reflection looked like me, but older or younger. Sometimes it seemed like a completely different person was looking back. The baskets weren't selling anymore. Word had gotten around about the returns, and customers started avoiding that display. But somehow, there seemed to be more of them. I'd count 12 baskets at closing and find 14 the next morning, then 16, then 20. I called Mrs. Henderson at the funeral home to ask if there were more baskets at Margaret's house, but she said we'd taken everything. "Are you feeling all right, Robert?" she asked. "You sound different." I caught myself speaking in a higher voice, with different speech patterns. For a moment, I'd been talking like my grandmother, using phrases she used to say. But my grandmother had been dead for 10 years. The customers who bought the returned baskets started acting strange too. Mrs. Peterson, who'd bought the basket with red geometric patterns, came into the store every day, but never bought anything. She just stood in the aisles, staring blankly at the merchandise. When I tried to talk to her, she didn't respond. She just stood there for hours, perfectly still, like a statue. Mr. Rodriguez did the same thing. Then the teenage girl who'd bought the smallest basket. They'd come in, stand motionless in different parts of the store, and leave when we closed without saying a word. I started having memories of dying, finalize in a lake, my lungs burning as water filled them. Burning in a house fire, feeling my skin blister and char. Falling from a cliff, the ground rushing up to meet me. Each death memory was perfectly vivid. The pain, the fear, the final moments of consciousness. But I was alive. I'd never died. The worst part was losing my own memories. I couldn't remember my first day at the thrift store. I couldn't remember my childhood dog's name, my mother's maiden name, the color of my first car. These personal details that make you who you are were just gone, replaced by someone else's life experiences. I tried to remove the baskets from the display, to store them in the back room until I could figure out what was happening. But my hands wouldn't cooperate. They moved in strange patterns, weaving motions like I was making baskets myself. I'd never learned to weave, but my fingers knew exactly how to work the imaginary reeds and grass. Saved, Zatwood. Sometimes I'd catch myself dancing. Traditional dances I'd never learned. My body moving to rhythms I'd never heard. I'd speak words in languages I didn't recognize, perform gestures that belonged to other cultures, other times. Who stood motionless in the store were increasing. 8 people now, scattered throughout the aisles like mannequins. They never blinked, never moved, never responded to anything. They just stood there, and somehow I knew they were experiencing other people's lives, lost in memories that weren't their own. On Halloween night, I stayed late to do inventory. The motionless customers had left when we closed, but the baskets seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. There were 30 of them now, filling most of the front section of the store. That's when she appeared. An elderly Native American woman materialized beside the basket display. She looked exactly like the woman who'd warned me at Margaret's house, but younger, much younger. Her hair was black instead of grey, her face unlined. She wore traditional dress decorated with intricate beadwork. "You didn't listen," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the empty store. "Who are you?" "I am the memory thief, or I was, 200 years ago when I walked among the living." She gestured to the baskets. "These are my children, my collection. I weave memories into them, experiences, lifetimes, souls." I tried to speak, but words came out in different voices, sometimes a child, sometimes an elderly man, sometimes a woman. The memory thief smiled. "You've absorbed hundreds of lifetimes, Robert, thousands of experiences. Can you still find yourself among all those other lives?" I couldn't. I tried to remember my own name, but I knew myself as Robert, and also as Maria, and also as William, and also as dozens of other names from other lives. I tried to remember my childhood, but I had hundreds of different childhoods competing for space in my mind. "Why?" I managed to ask in my own voice. "I collect human experience, every joy, every sorrow, every moment of wonder or terror or love. I trap them in my baskets so they can never be lost. Death ends lives, but I preserve them forever." She moved closer. "You've become my greatest collection piece. You contain more memories than any single basket. You are the sum of hundreds of human experiences." I understood then that she'd been dead for 2 centuries, but she lived on through her baskets. Every person who touched them became part of her collection, their memories absorbed and preserved. She fed on human experience, growing stronger with each life she captured. The customers who stood motionless weren't catatonic. They were experiencing the memories from the baskets, lost in other people's lives, while their own minds were consumed. I grabbed the cigarette lighter I kept behind the register and ran to the basket display. If I burned them, maybe I could stop this. Maybe I could save the people who were trapped. "You cannot destroy memories, Robert. They are part of you now." But I had to try. The lighter and held woven grass caught fire immediately, spreading faster than normal fire should. Within seconds, the entire display was ablaze. The memory thief screamed, not with her voice, but with the voices of everyone whose memories she'd stolen. Hundreds of people crying out as their captured experiences burned. I kept lighting fires throughout the store, setting everything ablaze. The smoke detectors shrieked, the sprinkler system activated, but it couldn't stop the supernatural flames. I should have run, but something kept me there, lighting more fires, even as the building filled with smoke and heat. The last thing I remember clearly is the ceiling collapsing, burning beams crashing down around me. I survived, somehow. The fire department said it was a miracle. They found me unconscious but alive in the middle of the completely destroyed building. Third-degree burns on my arms and legs, smoke inhalation. But I lived. The thrift store was a total loss. Everything burned. The baskets, the merchandise, the building itself. My boss collected the insurance money and decided not to rebuild. I was unemployed and too injured to work for months anyway. But the memories didn't burn with the baskets. I still have all of them. Every single experience I absorbed from touching those cursed objects. When I wake up in the morning, I remember being dozens of different people. I've lived through childhoods in the 1920s and the 1980s. I remember fighting in wars I never fought, loving people I never met, dying deaths I never died. Sometimes, I remember being Robert Kim, thrift store manager. But increasingly, that feels like just another false memory among thousands of others. I can't tell which experiences are really mine anymore. I work as a night security guard now, a job where I don't have to interact with many people. It's better that way, because I never know which personality is going to emerge when I speak. Sometimes I sound like a Southern belle from the 1950s, sometimes like a gruff construction worker, sometimes like a child. The doctors say it's trauma from the fire, some kind of dissociative disorder. They give me pills and therapy. But how do you explain that you're living hundreds of different lives simultaneously? I've stopped trying to find my original self among all the other identities. Maybe Robert Kim died in that fire, and what survived is just a collection of other people's memories wearing his face. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm making my security rounds, I catch glimpses of the memory thief in reflections. She's still out there somewhere, still collecting experiences, and I know that what happened to me is just the beginning. If you ever see authentic Native American baskets at an estate sale or thrift store, especially ones that seem too beautiful, too perfect to be just sitting there waiting for someone to buy them, walk away. Don't touch them. Don't even look at them too long. Some collections are meant to collect you back. My name is Jennifer Lopez, and I've been a rural mail carrier for 8 years. I know that sounds like a boring job to most people, but out here in the Yakima Valley, it's anything but simple. I drive over 200 miles a day through some of the most remote areas in Washington state. I know every dirt road, every hidden driveway, and every family that lives miles from their nearest neighbor. I've delivered mail during blizzards, floods, and even a forest fire. My supervisor always says I'm the best rural carrier they've ever had because I never miss a delivery. But what happened 3 months ago on Route 47 changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. The Yakima Valley has always been wild country. Most of my route takes me through dense forest where cell towers don't reach and GPS signals get confused. I drive a standard USPS mail truck, a white Grumman LLV that's older than I am. It's not fancy, but it's reliable, and I've learned to fix most problems myself. The engine runs rough sometimes, especially on cold mornings, but it's never completely died on me. In 8 years, I've only missed one delivery, and that was because a tree fell across the road during a storm. Route 47 is my longest route, a 40-mile loop that takes me to about 30 houses scattered through the forest. Most of the families out there are loggers, hunters, or people who just want to live away from everything. They rely on me for their mail, packages, and sometimes I'm the only person they see for weeks. I take that responsibility seriously. The house at 2847 Forest Service Road 23 belongs to an old man named Henry Crowfeather. He's lived there alone for at least 20 years, and he's one of my most reliable customers. Every Tuesday and Friday, he's always waiting by his mailbox with a cup of coffee, ready to chat about the weather or ask about my family. Henry gets a lot of mail, pension checks, medical supplies, letters from relatives on the reservation. In 8 years, I've never had to leave his mail in the box. He's always there. That's why I got worried when he didn't show up for 3 weeks straight. It was October 15th when I first noticed something was wrong. The weather had been getting colder, with heavy fog rolling through the valleys every morning. I pulled up to Henry's mailbox around 2 p.m., expecting to see him waiting like always. But the driveway was empty, and his mailbox was stuffed full. I had to force the new mail in with the old letters. Well, figured maybe he was sick or had family visiting, so I didn't think much of it at first. But the next Tuesday, the same thing happened, and the Friday after that. By the 4th week, I had a stack of certified letters and medical packages that needed signatures. My supervisor told me I had to make contact with the resident or file a welfare check report. Henry's house sits about a quarter-mile back from the main road, down a gravel driveway that winds through thick pine trees.
Never actually driven back there before.
He always met me at the mailbox. But on November 5th, I decided I had to check on him. I turned my truck down his driveway, driving slow because the path was narrow and bumpy. The trees on both sides were so thick they blocked most of the daylight, even though it was only 2:30 in the afternoon. My truck's engine started running rough as soon as I left the main road, making a weird knocking sound I'd never heard before. Henry's house was small and old, with a covered porch and firewood stacked against one wall. His pickup truck was parked in front, but all the windows in the house were dark. I honked my horn twice, our usual signal, but nobody came out. I grabbed Henry's mail and walked up to the front door. That's when I noticed something strange. The wooden steps leading to his porch were covered in what looked like scratches, long, deep gouges in the wood, like someone had dragged giant fingernails across them. I knocked on the door and called out, "Mr. Crowfeather! It's Jennifer from the post office!" No answer. But as I stood there, I started hearing something from the forest behind the house. It sounded like drumming, a slow, steady beat that seemed to come from deep in the trees. I thought maybe Henry was doing some kind of ceremony back there, so I walked around the house to look. The backyard ended at a wall of pine trees so thick I couldn't see more than a few feet into the forest. The drumming was definitely coming from in there, but it was impossible to tell how far away it was. The sounds seemed to bounce between the trees, making it hard to pin down the direction. "Mr. Crowfeather?" I called toward the trees. "Are you back there?" That's when I heard my own voice answer from the forest. "I'm back here, Jennifer. Come find me." I stopped cold. The voice was perfect. Exactly my voice, my accent, even the way I say my name. But I hadn't said those words. I was still standing in Henry's backyard, but somehow my voice was coming from deep in the trees. I backed away from the forest and hurried to my truck. This was getting too weird, and I had other deliveries to make. But when I turned the key, my engine just clicked. No grinding, no coughing, just a dead click, like the battery was completely drained. I tried again. Same thing. The radio was dead too, and my cell phone showed no signal bars. I popped the hood and looked at the engine, but I'm not a mechanic. Everything looked normal to me, but the truck was definitely dead. That's when I noticed the footprints. They were in the soft dirt around my truck. Prints that looked almost human, but way too big. Each print was at least 18 inches long and showed 5 distinct toes. But the weird part was how deep they were pressed into the ground, like whatever made them weighed a lot more than any person. The drumming from the forest was getting louder, and now it had a rhythm like a heartbeat. I tried my truck again, and this time the engine turned over but died immediately. On the third try, it started but ran so rough it was barely staying alive. I didn't wait around to see what would happen next, I put the truck in reverse and headed back down the driveway as fast as I dared. But as I drove, I kept hearing voices calling from the trees on both sides of the road. My voice asking me to stop. My voice asking for help. My voice saying things I would never say. When I finally reached the main road, my truck smoothed out and ran normal again. My cell phone picked up signal and the radio started working. I sat there for a few minutes, trying to figure out what had just happened. I decided to call my supervisor and report that I couldn't make contact with the resident at 28047 Forest Service Road 23. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints. I did some research that night. I asked my neighbor, who's lived in the valley his whole life, about the drumming and the footprints. He got quiet for a long time, then told me about something called stick Indians. He said they were old legends from the local tribes, stories about giant forest spirits that could mimic human voices and walked on two legs like people, but stood over 12 feet tall. Finally, I figured it was just local folklore, but the next day at work, I asked around. One of the other carriers, a guy named Mike who's been working rural routes for 15 years, got the same serious look when I mentioned stick Indians. "They're real," he said. "I've never seen one, but I've had weird things happen in those deep woods. Voices calling from places where nobody should be. Equipment failing for no reason. There are some addresses I won't deliver to anymore because of stuff like that." He told me that several mail carriers had gone missing over the years in the remote parts of the valley. The official reports always blamed accidents, trucks sliding off roads, carriers getting lost in the woods, things like that. But Mike thought there was more to it. 2 weeks later, my supervisor told me I had to go back to Henry's house. The sheriff's department had done a welfare check and found the house empty, but they needed me to collect all the accumulated mail for return to senders. I didn't want to go, but it was my job. This time I brought a portable radio and made sure my truck had a full tank of gas. I drove down Henry's driveway again on a Tuesday afternoon, and everything seemed normal at first. The house was still empty, but there were no weird scratches on the porch and no strange sounds from the forest. I loaded all of Henry's mail into my truck and was getting ready to leave when I heard my cell phone ringing. I looked at the screen, and it showed my own phone number calling me. "That's impossible. You can't call yourself." But the phone kept ringing, so I answered it. "Hello?" I said. Said my own voice through the phone. "Why did you leave me?"
In the forest? Come back and find me. I'm lost.
Balled up immediately and started my truck. The engine turned over fine, but as I was backing up, I heard a loud crack from somewhere above me. I looked up through the windshield and saw tree branches moving like something heavy was traveling through them. The branches were at least 30 feet off the ground, but they were bending and swaying like a person was walking across them. My phone started ringing again. Same number, my own number. I didn't answer, but I could hear it buzzing in my pocket as I drove back to the main road. That night, I called the sheriff's office and asked about Henry Crowfeather. The deputy told me they'd found his house empty with no signs of a struggle. His truck was there, his clothes were in the closet, but he was gone. They figured he'd wandered off and gotten lost in the woods, maybe had some kind of medical episode. But when I asked if they'd found his body, the deputy got quiet. "We searched for 3 days with dogs and helicopters," he said. "Never found a trace of him. I should have transferred to a different route right then. But I'm stubborn, and I don't like being scared away from doing my job. So I kept working Route 47, but I started carrying a GPS tracker and a satellite phone in case my regular equipment failed again. Normal for about a month. Then, in December, I got a new certified delivery for 2847 Forest Service Road 23. The letter was addressed to Henry Crowfeather, return address from the tribal council. I knew the house was empty, but regulations said I had to attempt delivery before returning it. Before dry down Henry's driveway one more time. It was snowing lightly, and the forest was dead quiet. No bird sounds, no wind, nothing. When I got to the house, I saw that someone had been there recently. There were those same giant footprints in the snow all around the building, and the front door was standing wide open. I parked and got out with the certified letter, planning to just leave a delivery notice and get out of there. But as I walked toward the house, I heard Henry's voice calling from inside. "Jennifer, thank goodness you're here. I need help." I stopped at the bottom of the porch steps. Henry's voice sounded exactly right, but something felt wrong about it. "Mr. Crowfeather?" I called back. "Are you okay?" "Paralyzed." "I'm hurt," came the reply. "I fell and I can't get up. Please come help me." I stood there for a minute, trying to decide what to do. If Henry was really in there and needed help, I couldn't just leave him. But I remembered how my own voice had called to me from the forest. "Where have you been for the past 2 months?" I asked. Henry's voice answered, "I've been right here waiting for you. Please come inside." That's when I noticed that Henry's voice was coming from the wrong part of the house. The sound was coming from the back bedroom, but I could see straight through the front door to the back wall, and nobody was there. I backed away from the house and hurried to my truck. As I was getting in, I heard multiple voices calling to me. Henry's voice, my own voice, and other voices I didn't recognize. They were all begging me to come into the house, all claiming they needed help. My truck started fine, but as I was driving back down the driveway, I heard something that made my blood freeze. It was the sound of heavy footsteps running through the forest, keeping pace with my truck. But the footsteps were coming from above, like something was running from tree to tree through the branches. I pressed the gas pedal down as far as I dared on the narrow driveway. The footsteps kept pace with me, and I could hear branches cracking and leaves rustling as something big moved through the canopy. Then I heard my own voice calling from the trees on both sides of the road. "Stop the truck, Jennifer. You're going the wrong way. The road doesn't go this way." But I could see the main road ahead of me, so I knew the voice was lying. I kept driving, and the voices got more desperate. "Turn around, we'll help you find the way." I reached the main road, and my truck's engine smoothed out immediately. The voices stopped, and the forest went quiet again. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, I saw something that made me floor the gas pedal. There was something standing in the middle of Henry's driveway, watching me drive away. It looked almost human, but it was way too tall, at least 12 feet, with arms and legs that seemed too long and thin. It was standing perfectly still, but even from a distance, I could tell it was watching me. I drove straight back to the post office and told my supervisor everything that had happened. I showed him the GPS track on my phone, which clearly showed me driving down a normal driveway and back out. But when he called the sheriff's office to report the sighting, they told him something that made both of us go quiet. As according to their records, the house at 2847 Forest Service Road 23 had burned down 15 years ago. Henry Crowfeather had died in the fire. The address had been officially discontinued, and mail delivery to that location had been suspended since 2008. But I had been delivering the delivery confirmations and the route logs to prove it. That night, I went online and searched through old newspaper archives. I found the story about Henry's house fire from 2008. But I also found something else: records of mail carriers who had gone missing in the Yakima Valley going back to the 1960s. Every 10 or 15 years, a rural mail carrier would disappear on a remote route. Their trucks would be found abandoned or wrecked, but the carriers themselves were never found. All of them had been delivering to addresses that officially didn't exist. I took an urban route the next week. I now deliver mail in downtown Yakima, where the biggest danger is aggressive dogs and heavy traffic. The post office officially discontinued rural Route 47 after my report, citing safety concerns and budget cuts. Late at night, my phone still rings with calls from my own number. When I answer, I hear my own voice asking me to come back to the forest. I hang up immediately, but the calls keep coming. I've never gone back to those woods, and I never will. But I think about Henry Crowfeather sometimes, and all those other mail carriers who disappeared over the years. I think they're still out there, somewhere in the forest, calling for help with voices that aren't their own. If you ever get a job delivering mail in rural areas, be careful about addresses that seem too isolated, especially if the GPS has trouble finding them. And if you ever hear your own voice calling to you from the woods, don't answer back. Just drive away as fast as you can, and don't look in your mirrors.
My name is Maria Santos, and I've been a park ranger at Crater Lake National Park for 4 years. I specialized in aquatic safety and boat patrol operations, which means I spend most of my time on the water, making sure tourists don't do anything stupid around one of the deepest lakes in America. I've pulled drunk college kids out of ice-cold water, rescued overturned kayaks, and dealt with everything from heart attacks to hypothermia. The lake doesn't forgive mistakes, and in 4 years, I thought I'd seen every way it could try to kill someone. I was wrong about that. Dead wrong. What happened during the summer of 2024 changed everything I thought I knew about Crater Lake, and I'm starting to think that maybe some places on this earth aren't meant for people at all. Let my typical day first, so you understand how wrong everything went. Crater Lake sits in the collapsed crater of an ancient volcano, about 1,943 feet deep at its deepest point. The water is so clear you can see down 100 feet on a good day. My job was to patrol the lake in a 22-foot Boston whaler, checking on tourists, monitoring water conditions, and making sure nobody was doing anything dangerous. By launching from the lake's north shore to pick up a few boat patrol ramp near the visitor center. The lake is massive, about 6 miles across, so I do a full circuit every few hours, checking all the popular spots where people like to fish or swim. My boat had standard ranger equipment, marine radio, fish finder, emergency medical kit, and a winch for water rescues. The Park Service also gave us underwater cameras for documenting any problems with the boat ramp or checking for debris. The water temperature in Crater Lake never gets above 60 degrees, even in summer. Most tourists could only last about 15 minutes before hypothermia started setting in. That's why my job mattered. People would jump in thinking they were tough, then realize they couldn't feel their arms and legs. I'd fish them out, blue-lipped and shaking, wrap them in emergency blankets, and lecture them about respecting the lake. But that summer started differently. The first weird thing happened in early June, when I got called to the deep water area near the center of the lake. A family from Portland had called in a complaint about strange singing coming from underwater. When I reached their location, they were all standing at the edge of their rental boat, staring down into the water. "It's like whale songs," the father told me, "but there aren't any whales in here, right?" I listened for about 10 minutes, but didn't hear anything unusual. Just the normal sounds of water lapping against boats and wind through the trees on the rim. I figured it was probably the sound of their boat engine echoing off the crater walls, or maybe some kind of acoustic trick the lake played sometimes. I told them that and sent them on their way. But then it happened again, and again. By the end of June, I was getting at least one report per week about underwater singing or music, always in the deepest parts of the lake, always described the same way, like whale songs mixed with something else, something almost human. The Diving and Park Service started having problems around the same time. They were contracted to inspect the boat ramps and check for any underwater hazards, but suddenly they were refusing to go below 200 feet. When I asked the dive supervisor what was wrong, he just shook his head. "Oh, reclaimed keeps failing down there," he said. "Regulators, depth gauges, underwater lights. 3 different sets of gear, all brand new, all failing at the same depth. We're not risking our people until we figure out what's causing it." That should have been my first real warning, but I was still thinking logically. Equipment fails. Lakes have weird acoustics. People hear things when they're scared or excited.
I'd been a ranger long enough to know that most mysterious incidents had boring explanations. Then my own equipment started acting up. It was a Tuesday morning in July when I first noticed something wrong with my fish finder. I was doing my regular patrol, running the sonar to check water depth and look for any submerged debris that might be dangerous. The fish finder was a Garmin unit, standard marine equipment that I'd used hundreds of times. Simple technology. It sends a sound pulse down and measures how long it takes to bounce back. But that morning, when I passed over the deepest part of the lake, the display showed something impossible. According to the sonar, I was looking at depths of over 3,000 feet. That was wrong. Crater Lake is deep, but not that deep. The official depth is 1,943 feet, confirmed by multiple surveys over the years. I figured the unit was malfunctioning, so I marked the location on my GPS and made a note to have maintenance check the fish finder. But when I came back the next day with a backup unit, it showed the same impossible readings. 3,000 feet, sometimes deeper. I started mapping these anomalies, marking every location where the sonar gave impossible depth readings. What I found made no sense. There were zones scattered across the lake where my equipment insisted the bottom was much deeper than it should be. Not everywhere, just specific spots, usually in the areas where tourists reported hearing the underwater singing. The strangest part was that these zones seemed to move. A spot that showed normal depth one day would show impossible readings the next, then go back to normal by the end of the week. It was like there were holes in the bottom of the lake that opened and closed randomly. Nightlife, I tried to get underwater cameras down to those locations to see what was happening. The Park Service had 2 underwater camera units, basically waterproof cameras on long cables that I could lower from the boat. They were designed to go down about 300 feet
For routine inspections.
The camera made it down about 200 feet before the feed cut out. When I pulled it back up, the housing was cracked and the lens was completely black, like it had been painted over. The second camera failed the same way, at almost exactly the same depth. But I managed to recover about 30 seconds of footage before the first camera died. What I saw in that footage still gives me nightmares. Crystal clear for the first 150 feet, just like always. Fish, rocks, the normal underwater landscape of the lake. But as the camera went deeper, the water started to look different, darker, even though my lights were working. And then, just before the feed cut out, I saw something that couldn't exist. Symbolic structures, buildings, what looked like stone walls or foundations, geometrically perfect, stretching away into the darkness. But Crater Lake was formed by a volcanic collapse 7,700 years ago. There was never a city here, never any permanent human settlement. The Native American tribes considered this place sacred, but they never built anything permanent near the water. I submitted a report to my supervisor, along with copies of the sonar readings and what video footage I'd managed to recover. His response was to send the equipment in for maintenance and suggest I was probably seeing underwater rock formations that looked artificial in low light conditions. Maybe he was right. Maybe I wanted to believe there was something extraordinary down there. But things kept getting worse. The lake temperature started dropping in August, not gradually like seasonal change. Overnight, massive sections of the lake would become 15 to 20 degrees colder than they should be. I'd measure 58 degrees on a Tuesday, then come back Wednesday morning to find the same area reading 38 degrees. Cold enough that swimming became impossible in those sections, even for experienced cold water swimmers. The tourist incidents escalated too. People weren't just reporting strange sounds anymore. Families would come back from fishing trips with one member completely catatonic, staring at the water and not responding to questions. They'd stand at the shore for hours, no matter how cold it got, until someone physically dragged them away from the lake. The Park Service started documenting these incidents as altitude sickness or mild hypothermia affecting cognitive function. But I'd seen real altitude sickness. This was different. These people looked like they were listening to something,
waiting for something. By late August, I was finding dead fish floating in the deep areas every morning. Not just a few fish, hundreds of them, all perfectly healthy looking, except for being dead. No signs of disease, no visible injuries, no toxins that our water tests could detect. They just stopped living. The water quality reports came back clean every time. Temperature, pH, oxygen levels, bacterial count, everything normal.
But something was killing fish by the hundreds, dropping the water temperature by 20 degrees overnight and making people stand catatonic at the shoreline. I started avoiding the deep water areas during my patrols. I told myself it was because of the equipment failures, but really, I was scared. The lake felt wrong. It felt like something huge was moving around down there, something that didn't want to be disturbed. Then came the morning that changed everything. It was September 15th, a Tuesday. Calm weather, clear skies, water like glass. I got a call around 10 a.m. about a capsized kayak near the center of the lake. Solo paddler, male, age unknown. This was exactly the kind of rescue I'd trained for. I reached the location in about 12 minutes. The kayak was floating upside down, but I couldn't see anyone in the water. I called out, circled the area, used my binoculars to scan for any sign of the kayaker. Nothing. Then I heard him calling for help. The voice was coming from underwater, about 50 feet down. Impossible, but I could hear him clearly. A man's voice, shouting for help, asking someone to pull him up. I got my wetsuit on and went into the water with a rescue line. The lake was so cold it felt like knives, but I followed the voice down. 20 feet, 30 feet, 40 feet. The voice kept getting clearer, more desperate. At 50 feet down, I realized the voice wasn't coming from above me. It was coming from below, much, much below. Blindness. That's when something bumped into my boat from underneath. The entire 22-foot Boston whaler lifted up out of the water, tilted at a 30-degree angle, then crashed back down. I came up gasping, swam to the boat as fast as I could, and hauled myself over the side. My marine radio was making sounds I'd never heard before. Not static. It sounded like whale songs mixed with human screaming, broadcast on every emergency frequency. The fish finder was going crazy, showing massive objects moving at impossible speeds in the deep water. And the water around my boat was turning black. Not dark blue or murky, black, like ink. The color was spreading outward from directly beneath me, and I could see it getting darker as whatever was down there came closer to the surface. I started the engine and got the hell out of there. But as I was leaving, I looked back and saw something break the surface for just a second. Something huge, organic but wrong, like living rock covered in what looked like barnacles or coral. And I swear, I saw an eye. An eye the size of a car hood, ancient and intelligent and completely alien. The thing in the lake had been calling to people. All summer long, it had been trying to get someone to come down to the deep water. The singing, the equipment failures, the temperature drops. It was all part of something trying to communicate, or trying to feed. I filed my incident report and requested an immediate transfer to Desert Parks. My supervisor approved it without question, probably because I sounded half insane trying to explain what I'd seen. The official report listed the kayaker as missing, presumed drowned, body not recovered. But oh, he didn't drown. I water, down to those impossible depths where stone structures wait in the darkness. I work at Death Valley now, where the most dangerous thing is the heat, and there's no deep water anywhere. But I still follow the news from Crater Lake. Every year during peak tourist season, people go missing. Solo hikers, kayakers, swimmers. The Park Service lists them as accidents, but the numbers are getting higher. I dream about that voice calling from underwater, calling for help, begging someone to come down and pull him up from wherever he is now. If you ever visit Crater Lake, stay away from the deep water. Don't listen to any strange sounds you might hear. And if you start feeling like you need to stand at the shoreline and wait for something, get in your car and drive away as fast as you can. some plaint for people. And some things that live in those places have been waiting a very, very long time for someone to answer their call. My name is Tom Chen, and I've been driving for Amazon for almost 2 years now. Started right out of college when I couldn't find anything in my business degree field. The pay's decent, benefits are good, and honestly, I like being on the road instead of stuck in some cubicle. I've delivered to some pretty remote places around Portland, mountain cabins, farmhouses way out in the middle of nowhere, places where your GPS just gives up and says, "Good luck." I thought I'd seen it all. But what happened last October near Mount Hood changed everything I thought I knew about those deep forest deliveries. Some places aren't meant for visitors, no matter what the address says. I'd been working the rural route for about 6 months when this happened. My supervisor Jake had warned me that the mountain deliveries were tricky. A lot of these cabins don't have proper street addresses, just numbers painted on trees or mailbox posts. Follow the GPS as far as it takes you, then use your eyes, he always said. The pay was better for rural routes because most drivers didn't want to deal with the hassle of dirt roads and spotty cell service. October 15th was one of those perfect fall days in Oregon. Clear skies, temperature around 60 degrees, leaves just starting to turn. I had my usual van loaded up with about 40 packages for the Mount Hood area. Most of my stops were the regular customers, weekend cabin owners, a few full-time mountain residents, the occasional preppers who lived completely off-grid. I knew the route pretty well by then. My last delivery was supposed to be easy. Package for someone named R. Patterson at 47829 Forest Service Road 18. The GPS showed it was about 12 miles up the mountain from my second to last stop. I'd never delivered there before, but the address was in our system, so someone had been getting packages. Probably just another weekend cabin I hadn't hit yet. My drive started normal enough. Forest Service Road 18 was paved for the first few miles, then turned to gravel. Pretty standard for mountain deliveries. Trees got thicker as I climbed higher, mostly Douglas fir and cedar, the kind of old-growth forest that makes you feel small. Cell service cut out around mile 8, but that was normal too. Amazon drivers get used to being disconnected. Until a bee was working fine screen just went blue for about 30 seconds. When it came back on, it was showing my location as somewhere in Canada. I pulled over and restarted the system, but it did the same thing. Third time, it showed me in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Finally, I just gave up and decided to navigate the old-fashioned way, looking for address numbers on trees. The package were 47829, so I was looking for something in the high 47,000s. I found a tree with 47,200 painted in yellow numbers, so I knew I was close. The road got narrower and bumpier. Branches started scraping the sides of my van. I was thinking this Patterson guy better be giving good tips for making me drive this far. That's when I heard my dispatch radio calling my name. "Tom! Tom Chen, come in!" I grabbed my radio. "This is Tom, go ahead." None born, but static. But then I heard it again. "Tom Chen, where are you?" It was coming from outside the van, from the forest. I stopped the van and listened. Dead quiet except for wind in the trees. I keyed my radio again. "Dispatch, this is Tom, do you copy?" Static. But then, clear as day from somewhere in the trees to my right. "Tom, we need you to respond." I know my dispatcher's voice. Mike's got this scratchy smoker's voice that's hard to miss. This sounded exactly like him, but he was coming from the forest, not my radio. My scanner and got out of the van. Maybe there was some weird echo thing happening with the mountains. I'd heard stranger things. Started walking toward where I'd heard the voice, following what looked like a trail between the trees. "Hello? Mike? You out here? Tom Chen, respond, please." The voice was definitely coming from ahead of me on the trail. Had to be some kind of radio relay or something. I followed the voice for maybe 50 yards into the forest. That's when my package scanner started going off.
The thing was beeping and lighting up like I was making a delivery. I looked at the screen and almost dropped it. It was showing completed deliveries from earlier that day, but the customer names were wrong. It showed, "Delivery complete, Mrs. Henderson." But the voice coming from the scanner was saying, "Tom? Tom, I need my package." Mrs. Henderson had been my third stop that morning. Sweet old lady who always offered me coffee. But her voice was coming from my scanner, asking for her package. The same package I'd already delivered 8 hours ago. But it kept beeping. Then I heard another voice from the forest off to my left. "Tom Chen, Amazon delivery." It was Mr. Rodriguez from stop number 7. His voice was coming from the woods, calling for his package. But I'd delivered his package too. I'd watched him sign for it on his front porch. That's when I heard my van horn honking behind me. Length, steady blasts. Someone was laying on my horn. But I had the keys in my pocket. I ran back toward the road, crashing through branches and stumbling over roots. When I got back to where I'd parked, my van was exactly where I'd left it. Doors closed, windows up, nobody around. But the keys weren't in my pocket anymore. I checked every pocket twice. No keys. The van was locked, and the keys were nowhere. I looked on the ground, retraced my steps into the forest. Nothing. Then I heard the honking again. But this time it wasn't coming from my van. It was echoing from deeper in the forest, up the mountain. Like someone was driving an Amazon van through the trees. I found a rock and was about to break my window when I heard footsteps behind me, heavy footsteps crunching in the gravel. I turned around and there were footprints leading from the edge of the forest to my van. Fresh prints in the dirt and fallen leaves. But they were huge, at least twice the size of my boots and shaped weird, too long and narrow with what looked like claw marks at the front. The prints circled my van 3 times, then headed back into the forest. My radio crackled to life. "Tom, why did you leave your route?" It was my own voice coming from the radio. I was talking to myself. "Tom, you need to complete your delivery," my voice said from the radio. "Follow Forest Service Road 18 to the end." Municipality. I tried to answer, but when I keyed the mic, nothing happened. My own voice kept talking to me from the radio, giving me directions to somewhere I'd never been. "Turn left at the dead oak tree. Follow the creek for half a mile. Look for the cabin with blue smoke coming from the chimney." Brightness. That's when my GPS came back online, but instead of showing satellite view, it was showing a hand-drawn map, like something a kid would draw. Trees represented by green circles, a squiggly line for the creek, and a little house at the end with blue crayons scribbled above it. And my GPS was talking to me in my own voice. "In 200 feet, turn left at the dead oak tree." Abandoned, I wasn't even in my van. I was standing next to it with no keys. But the GPS was giving me directions in my own voice. Ailey started hearing more voices from the forest. Customers from my entire route that day. Mrs. Chen asking about her cat food delivery. Jim from the hardware store wanting his tools. Sarah from the farmhouse looking for her books. All of them calling from different directions in the forest, asking for packages I'd already delivered. But mixed in with the customer voices, I started hearing something else. Sounds like Amazon vans driving through the forest. Backup beepers, engine noise, air brakes hissing. Like there was a whole fleet of delivery trucks just out of sight in the trees. I found my keys on the ground right where I was standing. They hadn't been there 10 seconds earlier. I grabbed them and got in my van as fast as I could. Started the engine and backed down the road, not caring about scratching the paint on the trees. Forensic. Brightness. But I couldn't find the main road. Every turn I took led to another gravel road going deeper into the forest. My GPS was still showing the hand-drawn map, still talking to me in my own voice. "Continue straight for 1.2 miles. You have missed your delivery window." Combating. Activates. That's when I saw the packages. Amazon packages hanging from tree branches about 40 feet up. Dozens of them, swaying in the wind like Christmas ornaments. All had delivery labels with addresses from my route. But they were packages I'd already delivered. I could see Mrs. Henderson's address, Mr. Rodriguez's name, the hardware store label.
Stopped the van and got out to look closer. Used my phone's flashlight to read the labels. Every package was from my route that day. But there were more packages too, with addresses I didn't recognize. Addresses like The Watcher in the Old Growth, and 7 miles past where roads end, and The One Who Calls Your Name. My radio crackled again. This time it was a whole conversation between multiple people, all using my voice. Tom, did you complete the Patterson delivery? Tom, customer was not available. Tom, what's your location? Tom is approximately 7 miles past the normal world. Negligible that, Tom. Return to base when you're done being studied. Beirut. Being studied. The words made my skin crawl. I got back in the van and kept driving, trying every road I could find. But they all led deeper into the forest, and the voices kept getting louder. Blindness. I started seeing them around sunset. Tillion's tall figures moving between the trees, at least 10 feet tall, thin like basketball players, but moving wrong. Too smooth, too quiet. They stayed just far enough away that I couldn't see details, but close enough that I knew they were following my van. My scanner was going crazy now, showing delivery confirmations for customers I'd never heard of. Package delivered, The Forest, and signature received, Old Growth Council, and delivery complete, Those Who Watch the Roads. Every time I looked in my mirrors, there were more of the tall figures. They were copying my movements. When I turned left, they turned left. When I stopped, they stopped. When I honked my horn, I heard the same pattern echoed from different spots in the forest. That's when I realized what was happening. They weren't trying to hurt me. They were learning from me, studying how I moved, how I sounded, how I did my job. The voices weren't random. They were playing back recordings of my interactions with customers. They'd been watching Amazon drivers for who knows how long, learning our routines, our procedures, our voices. I finally found a road that led downhill. Followed it for 20 minutes until I saw the glow of streetlights ahead. Real lights, not the weird blue glow I'd been seeing in the forest. I drove straight to the Amazon facility and didn't stop until I was in the parking lot, under the security lights. I marked the Patterson delivery as access denied and turned in my keys, told my supervisor that the road was washed out and the address was unreachable. Jake just shrugged and said it happened sometimes in the mountains. Amazon would remove the address from the delivery system if drivers couldn't reach it 3 times. 24 reported similar problems with Forest Service Road 18 over the next month. GPS failures, impossible addresses, voices in the forest. Amazon pulled the whole area from our delivery zone and marked it as inaccessible. I transferred to the city route the next week. Haven't driven in their mountains since. But sometimes, when there's a thunderstorm, I hear my own voice on my radio giving directions to places that don't exist. And I still get delivery confirmations on my scanner for addresses like The Tall Ones and Students of Human Routine. I don't know what the Stick Indians learned from studying Amazon drivers, but I hope they never decide to apply for jobs. My name is David Kim, and I've been working the night shift at gas stations for 3 years now. Started when I was 22, right after community college. Needed the job to pay rent, and night shifts paid better than days. Most people think it's boring work, scanning items, cleaning pumps, restocking shelves. But working alone from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., you see things. Drunk drivers trying to buy more beer. People having mental breakdowns at 2 in the morning. Truckers who haven't slept in 30 hours talking to themselves. I'd gas station. I was wrong. What happened last October at the Highway 26 station near Warm Springs changed everything I thought I knew about being alone at night. And now I know there are things out there that watch us. Things that want to become us. The Warm Springs travel stop sits about 30 miles east of town, right where Highway 26 cuts through the reservation. It's one of those big truck stops with 12 pumps, a deli counter,
and a small convenience store. During the day, it's busy with travelers heading to Central Oregon and truckers making their runs. But at night, especially weeknights, it gets quiet. Sometimes hours pass without a single customer. I liked working there because my manager Carol trusted me to handle things alone. The pay was decent, $14.50 an hour, plus time and a half after midnight. The station had good security too. Cameras everywhere, panic buttons behind the counter, and direct lines to both county sheriff and tribal police. Carol always said the cameras were our best protection. If anything weird happens, she'd tell new hires, just make sure it's all recorded. Itself was pretty standard. Glass windows across the front, giving me a clear view of all the pumps. 2 sets of double doors, main entrance and one by the restrooms. The counter ran along the back wall, with lottery machines, cigarette displays, and 3 register terminals. Behind me were the coffee stations, hot food warmers, and rows of snacks. Coolers full of drinks lined the side walls. Same pattern. Truckers would stop around midnight for coffee and bathroom breaks. A few locals might grab beer or cigarettes before the 2 a.m. cutoff. After that, things usually stayed quiet until the morning rush started around 6. 15th started like any other Tuesday night. I came in at 11, did my money count with the evening cashier, and settled in for 8 hours alone. Weather was getting cold, first real chill of fall. I turned up the heat and made fresh coffee. The pumps were running fine, lottery machine had plenty of paper, and all the cameras showed green lights on my monitor. My first customer of the night walked in. White guy, maybe 40, wearing a brown jacket and jeans. Nothing unusual about him. Average height, brown hair, clean shaven. He bought a pack of
Marlboro Lights and a coffee, paid with exact change and left without saying much. I didn't think anything of it. Lots of customers are quiet, especially truckers who've been driving for hours. I went back to reading my book and listening to late-night radio. But then the same guy came back an hour later. Same brown jacket, same jeans, same Marlboro Lights and coffee. He even paid with the exact same change, 2 20s and a 5. When I handed him his receipt, he looked at me with the same blank expression as before. "Have a good night," I said, like I had the first time. "You too," he answered, with the exact same tone. I watched him walk to the same parking spot and drive away in what looked like the same white pickup truck. But something felt off. His face looked different somehow. Not completely different, but like someone had changed small details. His nose was a little bigger. His eyes were a different shade of blue. His hair was parted on the opposite side. I shrugged it off. Night shift messes with your head sometimes. You start seeing patterns that aren't there. But then he came back again at 3 a.m. Same jacket, same jeans, same order. This time his face looked different again. Younger somehow. His cheekbones were higher and his jawline was sharper. But he moved exactly the same way. Same walk, same gestures, same way of counting out change. That's when I checked the security cameras. I pulled up the recordings from his first visit, then compared them to him standing at my counter right now. The timestamp showed 3 separate visits, but the camera footage was weird. During his first visit, the image was crystal clear. Second visit, there was some static. Now, looking at the live feed, his face kept fuzzing out, like the camera couldn't focus on him properly. I saved the video files and made notes in the logbook. 3 visits, same customer, slightly different appearance each time. Camera malfunctions during encounters. Carol always told us to document anything unusual. After he left the 3rd time, I walked around the store to clear my head. Everything seemed normal. Pumps working fine, doors locked properly, refrigerators humming along. But when I got to the back office to check the safe, I noticed wet footprints leading from the front door to the bathroom. That was strange. The customer hadn't looked wet, and it wasn't raining outside. I followed the footprints to the men's restroom and pushed the door open. The footprints ended at the far stall, but they weren't regular shoe prints. They were bare feet. Long, narrow bare feet with what looked like claw marks at the toes. The prints were still damp. I grabbed the mop and cleaned them up quickly.
Probably just some homeless person who snuck in while I was distracted. Happens sometimes, even with cameras. People find ways to avoid being seen. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I've been working nights for
3 years. You develop instincts about people and situations. This felt different, dangerous. At 4:30 a.m., he came back again. Fourth time, same routine. But now his face looked completely different. Older, with grey at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. Different coloured eyes too, brown instead of blue. When he handed me money, I noticed his hands. The fingers were too long, the nails were too sharp, and his skin felt cold. Not cool like someone who'd been outside, but cold like meat from a freezer. "Marlboro Lights and coffee," he said, in a voice that was slightly too deep. I rang him up, trying to act normal, but my hands were shaking. When I gave him his change, I made sure to touch his palm. His skin felt wrong, rough and scaly, like snake skin under a thin layer of human flesh. "Have a good night," I managed to say. "You too, David," he replied. I never told him my name. It wasn't on my name tag. I'd forgotten it at home. There was no way he could have known. After he left, I immediately called Carol. Voicemail. I tried the sheriff's office, but they said unless someone was threatening me directly, they couldn't send a unit for suspicious behavior. Tribal police said the same thing. I was alone. I pulled up the camera feeds again and watched his fourth visit. This time, the camera showed nothing. Empty store, with me apparently talking to myself and ringing up invisible purchases. According to the recording, I'd been alone the entire time. But the register showed 4 separate transactions for Marlboro Lights and coffee. 4 times, exact same total, exact same payment method. At 5:15 a.m., I saw him again. This time he was outside, standing by pump number 6. Just standing there, staring at the building, at me. I could see him clearly through the front windows. But when I looked at the security monitor, pump 6 showed empty space. He raised his hand and waved at me, a slow, deliberate wave. Then he walked toward the building. I grabbed the panic button behind the counter, but didn't press it yet. What would I tell the cops? That a customer who buys cigarettes 4 times a night was waving at me. The front door chimed as he entered. This time, he looked exactly like me. Sandy black hair, same brown eyes, same height and build. He was wearing my clothes, the same blue shirt and khakis I had on, even the small scar on my chin from a childhood accident. But his movements were wrong, too smooth, like he was floating instead of walking. "Marlboro Lights and coffee," he said, in my own voice. I couldn't move, couldn't speak. I just stared at this thing wearing my face, standing 3 feet away from me. He tilted his head, studying me. "Marlboro Lights and coffee," he repeated, exactly like a recording. That's when I understood. This wasn't a customer. This was something else. Something that had been watching me, learning how to be me. And now it was almost ready. I looked at the security monitor. It showed me standing behind the counter ringing up a sale. But there was no customer visible. Just me, apparently selling cigarettes to empty air. "I know what you are," I whispered. The thing wearing my face smiled with my own mouth. But the smile was wrong. Too wide, showing too many teeth. "Marlboro Lights and coffee," it said again. Then it started changing. Its face shifted and moved like clay. First it became the brown-haired customer from the first visit, then the younger version from visit 2, then the older one from visit 3. Finally, it settled back to looking like me. "David Kim," it said, pronouncing my name carefully. "David Kim. David Kim." I hit the panic button. Alarm started wailing, but the thing didn't seem to care. It just kept staring at me with my own eyes, repeating my name over and over. "David Kim works night shift. David Kim sells cigarettes. David Kim has worked here 3 years. David Kim lives alone." How did it know that? I'd never mentioned my living situation to anyone at work.
Through the front windows, I saw more figures approaching. All of them looked like me, but slightly different. Different ages, different clothes, different expressions. Like the thing had been practicing, trying to get my appearance exactly right. They surrounded the building, maybe 8 or 10 of them. All me, but wrong. Some moved too fast, others too slow. One was blinking too much. Another never blinked at all. Blinked. The real panic hit me then. This thing could become anyone. It could take my place, my job, my entire life. Who would know the difference? I grabbed my phone and called 911. "There's a break-in at the Warm Springs travel stop," I said when the dispatcher answered. "Multiple suspects, armed and dangerous." I didn't mention they all looked like me. Didn't mention the shape-shifting. Just gave them enough to send cars. The thing behind the counter laughed with my voice. "Police coming," it said. "2 David Kims. Which one real?" When I realized its plan. When the cops arrived, they'd find 2 identical people claiming to be the real David Kim. How do you prove you're yourself? But then I remembered something. The regular customers. 3 years of working nights, I knew dozens of truckers by name. Their routes, their families, their favorite snacks. Information only the real David Kim would have. I reached under the counter and grabbed the customer logbook. Names, dates, usual orders. If I could prove I knew details about regular customers, maybe the cops would believe me. Police sirens were getting closer. The thing at the counter looked nervous for the first time. "Stay away," it hissed, and its voice was different now. Not human anymore, deeper, with an echo like it was coming from somewhere far away. The other versions of me outside started running. They scattered in all directions as red and blue
Lights lit up the parking lot. Defiance deputies came through the front door with guns drawn. Behind them, a tribal police officer. "Don't move!" one of them shouted. They found me behind the counter and the thing standing by the cigarette display. We looked identical. "I'm David Kim," I said quickly. "I work here. That thing is not human." "I am David Kim," the creature said, in my exact voice. "He is not real." The deputies looked confused. One of them spoke into his radio, requesting backup. "Ask me about regular customers," I said. "I've worked here 3 years. I know everyone who comes through." The tribal officer stepped forward. "What's Tommy Bearcloud's usual order?" "Large coffee, black, 2 packages of beef jerky, and a lottery ticket," I answered immediately. "He drives the red Peterbilt, Route 97 to Seattle. His daughter just started college at Oregon State." The creature tried to copy my answer, but got the details wrong. Large coffee, cream, beef jerky, lottery ticket, red truck, Route 99. "Tommy doesn't drink cream in his coffee," the tribal officer said. "And Route 97, not 99. Me. What about Sarah running Bear?" "Diet Coke, Snickers bar, and she always asks about my family," I said. "Works at the tribal office. Stops by every Tuesday after her evening shift." Again, the creature got it wrong. Close, but not exact. After 20 minutes of questions about regular customers, the police were convinced. The real David Kim knew details about dozens of people. The creature could copy my appearance, but not 3 years of memories and relationships. But when they tried to arrest it, the thing started changing. Its face melted and shifted. Its body stretched and twisted. The deputies backed away as it became something that definitely wasn't human. Lay skin, too many joints in its arms and legs. Its face became a smooth, blank surface with black holes where eyes should be. It let out a sound like screaming wind and ran for the back door, moved faster than anything human, leaving claw marks in the floor tiles. The police searched the area for hours, but never found it. The security cameras showed the whole encounter, but the creature appeared as visual static in most shots. Only during the final transformation did it show up clearly. Carol made me take a week off after that. When I came back, I requested transfer to day shift. She approved it immediately, said she didn't want anyone working alone at that location anymore. The Warm Stop hired a security guard for night shifts. 2 people minimum,
never alone. They installed better cameras and motion sensors. But business dropped off. Word got around that something weird happened there. I still work for the same company, different location in town. Day shift means normal customers, normal problems. No more long nights alone with just truckers and insomniacs. But sometimes, in
Crowded places, I'll see someone who looks almost like a person I know. Almost, but not quite right. Different details that don't match. And I wonder if that thing is still out there, still learning, still practicing how to be human. Banged work alone anymore, ever. And I always trust my instincts when something feels wrong about a customer. Because now I know there are things that watch us, learn from us, and want to take our place. That's why I'm telling this story. If you work night shifts, especially alone, pay attention. Look for patterns. Trust your cameras, but trust your gut more. And if someone comes back too many times with their face just slightly wrong, don't wait to call for help. Submissive, because some customers aren't customers at all. My name is Jake Thompson, and I've been driving logging trucks for 7 years. Started right out of high school when my dad got me a job with Cascade Timber Company. I've hauled everything from Douglas fir to old-growth cedar through some of the most dangerous mountain roads in Oregon. 20-ton loads, hairpin turns, ice, snow, fog thick enough to cut with a knife. I've seen it all. I've driven through washouts where half the road fell into the canyon, and I've never missed a delivery deadline. But what happened 3 months ago in the Tillamook Forest changed everything I thought I knew about these woods. Some places aren't meant for machines, and some territories belong to things older than any logging company. Dispatch called with a rush job. Big order for a construction company in Portland, needed delivery by 6 a.m. Wednesday morning, or we'd lose the contract. The usual route through Highway 6 was closed for bridge work, and the detour would add 4 hours to my drive. I couldn't afford to be late. This was my biggest haul of the month, and I'd been pushing for a promotion to lead driver. I'd been running the old Forest Service road since I was 16, knew every turn and every grade. My rig was a 2019 Kenworth T880 with a Detroit DD15 engine, pulling a standard log trailer loaded with 40-foot cedar logs from a selective cut up near Sheridan. The load was balanced perfect, tie-downs tight, permit papers in order, everything by the book. That's when I remembered the old Nestucca River Road. It was a service road that cut straight through the heart of the Tillamook National Forest, saving maybe 2 hours if you knew how to navigate it. I'd driven it twice before, years ago, when the main roads were blocked by landslides. It wasn't on any GPS system, but I knew the turnoff. The GPS phone showed nothing but green forest where that road should be, but I'd driven it before. Sometimes these old logging roads don't make it into the computer systems. I grabbed my CB radio and tried raising dispatch, but all I got was static. Cell service was always spotty in the mountains anyway. The turnoff was right where I remembered it, marked by 2 massive Douglas firs that had been scarred by cables decades ago. The road surface was rougher than I remembered, cracked asphalt with weeds growing through the breaks. But it was wide enough for my rig, and the grade wasn't too steep. About 15 minutes in, that's when I first noticed something was wrong. The trees were arranged wrong. I know that sounds stupid, but when you've been driving forest roads for 7 years, you develop an eye for these things. Trees fall naturally in random patterns when storms knock them down. But here, fallen logs were stacked in perfect straight lines on both sides of the road. Not cut logs, whole trees with their bark still on, arranged like someone had built fence lines through the forest. I stopped the truck and climbed down to take a look. The logs were huge, old-growth trees that would have taken 3 men with chainsaws hours to cut down. But they weren't cut. They were broken off clean, like something had just snapped them in half and stacked them up. The brake marks were 15 feet off the ground. CB crackled to life. Instead of the usual chatter, I heard breathing. Deep, slow breathing that didn't sound human. It went on for maybe 30 seconds, then cut to static. I the truck and kept driving. These old roads played tricks on your radio sometimes. Atmospheric interference, they called it. 10 later, my side mirror caught movement. Something big was running alongside my truck, keeping pace at about 35 miles per hour. I couldn't see it clearly through the trees, just a dark shape moving parallel to the road. I hit the gas, pushing up to 40, then 45. Whatever it was kept up easily. Grabbed the CB again. "Dispatch, this is Thompson in Unit 47, do you copy?" Nothing, but that same slow breathing. This time it lasted almost a minute. That's when I saw the handprint on my windshield. It appeared right in front of my face, on the outside of the glass. A handprint bigger than a dinner plate, with 5 distinct finger marks. While I was driving, while I was looking right at the windshield. I slammed on the brakes, but hitting the air brakes on a loaded log truck isn't like stopping a car. It took me maybe 200 feet to get stopped, and when I finally climbed down to check the windshield, there was nothing there. Glass was clean as when I'd washed it that morning, while when I looked back down the road, there was a tree lying across it where I'd just driven through. A huge cedar, blocking the road completely. I would have had to drive right through it, but it was solid as a wall. My engine temperature gauge was climbing into the red zone. That made no sense. The Detroit engine was practically new, and I'd checked all the fluid levels that morning. I popped the hood anyway. Everything looked normal, but the radiator was bone dry. Not leaking, not steaming, just empty, like someone had drained it while I was driving. Confiscated attack extra coolant for emergencies. Filled up the radiator, but it took almost 2 gallons. That much coolant doesn't just disappear. The CB crackled again. This time it wasn't breathing. It was voices. Deep voices speaking in a language I'd never heard, with clicking sounds and low growls mixed in. It sounded like they were giving directions, calling out coordinates. I switched to channel 19, the trucker channel. "Breaker 19, this is Thompson in a Kenworth. Anybody out there?" Got louder, like they were responding to me. I turned off the radio and kept driving. The road started climbing steeper than I remembered. My engine was working hard, and I had to downshift to keep my speed up. That's when I realized something that made my blood go cold. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds, no insects, no wind in the trees. Even my engine seemed muffled, like the sound was being swallowed up by something. I'd been driving forest roads my whole life, and I'd never heard anything like it. Even in winter, there's always some kind of noise. This was like driving through a morgue. I reached for my cell phone to try calling dispatch, but the screen was dead. Battery showed full, but it wouldn't turn on. I tried my backup CB unit under the dash. Same thing, power, but no response. That's when my engine started missing. Rough idle, power dropping off, the temperature gauge was climbing again, even with fresh coolant. All my warning lights started flashing. Oil pressure, battery, everything. It was like the truck was falling apart around me. Something hit the passenger side of my cab, hard enough to rock the whole truck. I looked in my mirror and saw a face pressed against the window. A human face, but covered with coarse brown hair. Eyes that looked too intelligent, too aware. It was looking right at me. I floored it, but my engine was losing power fast. The thing, whatever it was, kept pace with my truck easily, reaching up with arms that seemed impossibly long to touch my mirrors, my door handles. I could hear its breathing now, even over my engine noise. Deep, rhythmic breathing that sounded almost like words. My side mirrors showed more of them. 3, maybe 4 shapes running alongside my truck. They weren't trying to attack me, they were herding me. Whenever I tried to steer toward one side of the road, they'd appear on that side, forcing me back to the center. The road curved ahead into a clearing I didn't remember from before. My engine died completely just as I reached it. All my electrical systems went dead. No lights, no radio, no gauges. The truck coasted to a stop in the middle of a circle of standing stones. They weren't natural rock formations. Someone had arranged them there, big granite boulders placed in a perfect circle, maybe 50 feet across. Each stone was 8 or 9 feet tall,
covered with symbols that looked carved but weathered smooth by decades of rain. I tried starting my engine. Nothing. Not even a click from the starter. I grabbed my flashlight from the glove compartment, but it wouldn't work either. Brand new batteries, but dead as a rock. That's when they stepped out of the tree line. For maybe 6. It was hard to count in the shadows. They looked like men, but bigger. Much bigger. The smallest one was probably 8 feet tall, with shoulders broader than my truck cab. They were covered head to toe in coarse brown hair, with faces that were almost human, but not quite. Their eyes reflected light like an animal's, and when they moved, they didn't make any sound. The biggest one stepped forward. It was carrying something in its hands. Pieces of my truck. My side mirror, a section of chrome bumper, one of my mud flaps. It set them down on one of the stones, arranging them in a pattern I couldn't understand. They hurt me, that much was clear. They could have torn my truck apart with their bare hands if they wanted to. Instead, they were communicating something, showing me something. Bald one made a sound that might have been words, deep, rumbling sounds with clicks and grunts mixed in. It pointed at my truck, then at the arranged pieces, then back at the trees. I understood. This was their territory. My truck, my job, my logging routes, none of that mattered here. This place belonged to them, and they were telling me to leave. I climbed down from my cab slowly, hands visible. The big one watched me but didn't move closer. I backed toward the tree line, keeping my eyes on them but not staring directly. Something about their posture told me that would be a challenge. When I reached the edge of the clearing, I turned and ran. I followed a creek downstream for maybe 3 miles, moving as quietly as I could. The water was the only sound in the whole forest, and I stayed in it to hide my scent. I'd learned enough hunting with my dad to know that much. Me to a Forest Service road I recognized. It took me 4 hours of walking to reach the ranger station, and another hour before they could get a search team organized. They found my truck 3 days later, or what was left of it. Every bolt had been removed, every piece carefully taken apart and arranged in patterns around those standing stones. The engine block was placed in the center of the circle. My log load was stacked in perfect spirals around the clearing, like some kind of art installation. The investigators said it looked like the work of vandals with heavy equipment, but they couldn't explain how anyone had gotten a crane into that area. The Forest Service blamed environmental activists. The insurance company called it theft and vandalism. I quit Cascade Timber the following Monday, moved to Portland, and got a job driving delivery trucks for a furniture company. City routes only, never more than 50 miles from the warehouse. I don't go into the forests anymore. The company lost 2 more trucks in that area over the next month. Both drivers reported equipment failures, strange radio transmissions, and feeling like they were being followed. Management finally declared that whole section of forest off limits for operations. I still wake up sometimes, hearing that breathing on the radio. Deep, steady breathing that sounds almost like words in a language older than any human settlement. And sometimes, when I'm driving the quiet streets at 4 a.m., I catch myself checking my mirrors for shapes running alongside my truck. Deported places in these forests where the old rules still apply, where territory belongs to things that were here long before the first
chainsaw, long before the first logging road. And they're still watching, still protecting what's theirs. Chung, respect that. I just wish I'd learned it before I drove into their territory uninvited.